So let me show you how to take apart this SSX23 magazine, clean it, lube it, put it back together so it'll work flawlessly. So we're gonna need a couple tools to take this thing apart. I got a little nail right here. I got an old cheap pair of pliers that I'm gonna use as a hammer, and also a wood clamp to help put it back together, and alcohol pads to clean it off. Now, if you look really closely at this magazine, we got 3 pins in here. We have 2 at the bottom and 1 at the top. The ones at the bottom hold this base on, the one at the top hold on the feed lips and this little gasket right here. First thing we need to do is take those off. All the pins I found in Novritch's products, it has a thicker knurled end and a smaller smooth end. We have to take it off with the smooth end first. This knurled end right here is too big to get through. So the first thing we have to do with our magazine is make sure it has no gas in it. Empty it completely or else you're gonna get a big surprise. So the knurled end of the pins on this magazine is on the right-hand side of the magazine. As the spring faces towards you, the knurled end is on this side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it down in front of me with the spring pointing to my right. So here's the 2 pins here holding the base on, and all I'm gonna do is just take this nail and tap on them to get them started out. Now I have the pins poking out about 3 or 4 millimeters. I just grab them with this pair of pliers and just twist them out. And then the base comes right off. Now if you didn't release the gas from this earlier, you're in for a rude surprise. Now we take out the spring and the follower and just set those aside. Take the base we just took off, set that aside. Next, we want to take off the feed lips and the gasket. There's a little pin right here that holds on the feed lips. Now, like we did before, we just take a pair of pliers and just work it right out. And then we just take off the feed lips and the gasket comes right out with it. So I already see a problem with these feed lips. There's a bunch of little residue in here on the corners. And that residue is on the feed lips because of bio-BBs. This residue from these bio-BBs builds up over time, and after a while it becomes really, really sticky, and it can completely gum up your magazine, and it can cause sticking and jamming. Fortunately, this residue comes off really easy with an alcohol pad. Just get in there and make sure you clean it off as best you can. After you've cleaned off the feed lips really well, look at the spring and the follower and make sure that this follower is cleaned off just as well as the other one. If this follower has a lot of residue on it or dirt and it gets really sticky, it can jam up into the feed tube on your magazine. So if you're having trouble with your magazine's feeding once you get to the end of the BBs, it could be because your spring is a little bit weak. Just take your spring, pull it out a little bit, and it'll feed those BBs perfectly. Next thing we want to do is look closely at our magazine body. Now I'm looking at mine and I can see a whole lot of dirt and debris and dust in here in the BB track. Also at the very top here where the BB feed lips go and the gasket, I can put my finger down in there and there's a whole lot of crud in there. So I'm going to take an alcohol pad and clean all of that out. I have this little tool from Novritch, and I'll leave you a link in the description for everything I'm using here. But we can use it on this base, the little fill end here. It slides right in and we can use it to take that out. And at this point, we want to take it out so we can take a good look at it. So this is what this little piece looks like here. You notice there's a little rubber gasket on it. So what I'm going to do is clean this off really good with an alcohol pad, both the screw and this little gasket. Once the gasket and the screw are cleaned off, I'm going to go down in here, the hole where the screw went, and I want to clean it out really good with this alcohol pad. Now I'm going to reinstall this little bitty gasket here, and I'm going to put some of this Airsoft lubricant on it. That will keep this gasket here nice and pliable and also help to seal it in the gun. Now I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this right now. When you're reinstalling this little fill tube right here, you don't want to Hercules it in, you just want to put it in there so it's just firm, not enough to break the tool. Here's the base of the magazine. There is an O-ring here. So let's grab an alcohol pad and clean this off as best we can and then reinstall that O-ring. On the back end of the magazine body, there is the gas release valve. Go ahead and take that out. When you take out the gas release valve, it'll come out with a spring. You'll notice that the spring has a big end and a little end. The big end fits inside the valve like this. So let's go ahead and inspect this and clean it off with an alcohol pad. There are 3 little O-rings. There's one here and 2 towards the bottom. Use a little bit of this airsoft lubricant and put a dab on that before you reinstall it. So the spring that was in the gas release valve, like I said, has a big end and a little end. Put the big end on the top of the valve and then slide it back in your magazine body and then tighten it down. Don't Hercules it down, just enough to make sure it's tight. After you put the gas release valve back in, press it to make sure it comes back out. You'll notice it comes back out really slowly, and that's because there's no gas in the magazine yet. We're gonna test it here in a minute. Okay, let's start reassembly. We're gonna need our base with our installed O-ring. We're gonna need both our pins and our magazine body. Here at the bottom, what I'm gonna do is take a little bit of this airsoft lubricant and I'm gonna put it down here on a lip on the inside. Not a whole lot, just enough to keep that O-ring wet. Next, we take this base and we just slide it into place. If you're having trouble getting the holes in the base to line up with the holes in the magazine body so you can get these pins in, just use a wood clamp. Tighten it down just enough to where these holes all line up and then install your pins. So one thing I do want to mention is I use a little bit of this airsoft lubricant on these pins before I put them in. That helps them slide in and also helps it when you need to take them out later. Seems like the first pin is always the hardest to get in. Next thing we want to do is install our spring follower down inside this magazine feed tube. On the top of the follower, you'll notice there's a tab. That tab, it lines up here on the slot of the BB feed tube. Here's our gasket, and I'm just going to take just a little bit of this lube, not a whole lot. If you put too much of this lube on this gasket, it's going to end up on the BBs. You want to put just enough on it to give it a sheen and then slide it into place. On these feed lips, around the edges, not on the top, I put just a little bit of that airsoft oil, just enough to give it a sheen. That way, it'll help slide it into place. Fortunately, we don't need the wood clamp to put this last pin in. Just make sure you put just a little touch of this oil on it and then slide it into place, and it should go in without any trouble at all. All right, so let's go ahead and fill this magazine up with some green gas. And then once we do that, what we want to do is we want to listen to the fill valve and we want to listen to the gas release valve to make sure there's no leaks. I don't hear any. And then we want to test it by pressing the button, make sure it comes right back out. And it does, it's looking really good. So if you hear any leaking from either valve, use your tool and tighten it down just enough to where you don't hear any leaking anymore. Don't over tighten it. Here's my freshly serviced magazine, my SSX23. Slide it in, let's test it and see if anything sticks. It's looking pretty good. So thanks for watching to the end. I hope this video was some use to you guys. If it was, please leave me a comment. And in the meantime, I got a video right here that shows you how to tear apart your SSX23, clean it and service it, and then put it back together. Have a good one, guys. Shreq out.